evening, everyone. I'm Amit Lahiri. I'm the Associate Director of the International Institute for Higher Education Research and Capacity Building. I'm also a Professor of Practice at the Digital Global University. By that, I think the university means that I bring in many years of experience as a practitioner, both in industry as well as working with various kinds of organizations. So my attempt is always to foster a discussion and dialogue between theory and praxis, as many of my students who are assembled here might know. So I don't entirely believe that the world of theory should be divorced from the world of praxis or practice. And therefore, with that, I'd like to introduce two very special guests here with us today. And they're all outstation, they're both outstation guests. One's come all the way from California, and the other one has come within India, but from all the way from Pune, just to be with all of you to share the experiences. So, the gentleman sitting right on my left is Jayant Sarnaik. And Jayant has a very kind of a passionate belief in conservation and environment, while at the same time ensuring livelihoods for communities, particularly local and settled settler communities, and also marginalized communities in the Western Ghats. As you know, Western Ghats is a Conservation International designated biodiversity hotspot, one of the 8 absolutely top biodiversity hotspots in the world. And various reports indicate that a large percentage, and progressively more and more of Western Ghats, which is a biodiversity, absolutely precious biodiversity spot, is being, degenerating rather. So in that context, he works with local communities to provide livelihoods, and also through the livelihoods, he incentivizes conservation agreements. And through these conservation agreements, he then measures the impact of such conservation in the Western Ghats, which are rapidly getting degraded. And he's going to be discussing these models. James, on the other hand, is the director of the Living Desert Zoo. Director of Conservation of the Living Desert Zoo in California. And he has traveled for the last, I don't know how many decades, across 18, 20 countries. That's 2 decades, across about 18 countries, doing conservation work. James has traveled both the world of academia as a conservation biologist, for many years teaching at Columbia University. And then, of course, as he was discussing with me, he found the actual practice of conservation more appealing than academia. So he's now a conservation biologist, and he's with us, and he works very closely with James, and he's going to share the global perspective of, again, sustainable livelihoods with communities in endangered ecosystems. So one is going to give the global perspective, one is going to give the local perspective, and with that, I really would like to extend a very warm welcome to our 2 guests at the Digital Global University for coming so far. And in your midst, and I'm sure we're going to have a very nice discussion in the next couple of hours. So, with that, I request Jen to basically start the conversation. Or James?
I think we're going to start with me.
So then I request James.
Again, thank you for taking the time out to come and spend the time with us. The way that I prefer to talk is more of as a dialogue. So I will ask a lot of questions. Speak up makes for a better discussion when it's not just me discussing. So what I want very much focused on documenting the extent and the impacts of human activities on biodiversity. In the last 10 years, I've come to realize really that what matters, if I want to make a difference for conservation, I need to engage with people. Right? And Jindal Global University is a social science heavy university. Many of you are social science kinds of people, or in law, or in economics, or in business, all of which are very important parts of this conservation psychology and of social solutions to conservation problems. Right? So what I'd like to emphasize is the conservation role that social sciences in particular can play on a global scale, but in particular here in India for conservation, right? So I've been working with the Applied Environmental Research Foundation. I've been very fortunate for the last almost 7 years. Actually, almost 8 years. For a very long time we've been working here in the Western Ghats, which is an amazing area. How many of you have ever been to the Western Ghats? All right, only a few. It's a stunning place, isn't it? The biodiversity there is like very few places on Earth. Incredibly rich, incredibly diverse, and also incredibly imperiled. Only about 10%, 12% of the Western Ghats is left intact, right? Mostly through development. And that's what makes it one of these biodiversity hotspots. There have been 35 that have been described around the world. The Western Ghats is in the top probably 15 in terms of importance and in peril, right? And why are these ecosystems in peril? In a general sense. Don't have to have the specific knowledge of the Western Ghats.
So why do you think? Why do you think it's a peril? Why do you think?
Kind of biodiversity found there is that is not possible to find somewhere else.
That's for certain true. But why is it that uniqueness does not make it a threat by itself, or make it be threatened by itself? Endemism is an issue sometimes when it's a very small, restricted range, but not by itself. There's something else that's coming in here. What is it of the thing that's coming into the Western Ghats and affecting this high endemism and narrow range of many of the species there?
We are encroaching into the space and we are not taking precaution while doing so.
Overexploitation.
Sorry?
Overexploitation of resources, and we're using the plants for various products like trifla, Western Ghats. So overexploitation is done to make the medicine and all.
Absolutely. Yeah, many important, medicinally important plants in the Western Ghats too, right? Great ethnobotany angle. Absolutely, right? Other people have things they want to share too? In essence, it's us, right? It's humans. That's the main reason why the Western Ghats is imperiled, and why all of these other biodiversity hotspots are imperiled, and why species as a whole are imperiled, right? I come from the United States. I was born there, but have lived there, went to 3 places there, then back to here, and then over to here, and in New York City, and now I live in San Diego, and also in work now at a place in Southern California, if such a place exists, called Palm Desert, which is very close to Palm Springs. Some of you may have heard of Palm Springs. It's very popular with Hollywood types in the winter because we are very warm in this area. In the summer, we're exceptionally warm at the Living Desert Zoo and Gardens, getting up to 50, 51 degrees Celsius in the summer, which makes not a whole lot of people want to come to the desert and to the living desert to be able to see these amazing animals, right, that we're working so hard to conserve. But what we do provide to people is a unique experience. We get people connected to species that are found in these desert ecosystems, right? Part of the reason why we are a unique organization, the Living Desert, as a place, is because of that 50, 51 degrees temperature in the summer, which is insanely hot. Has anybody ever been in a place that hot? It's like sticking your face into an oven, is basically what it feels like, right? You go outside, oh, I'm in an oven. That's what it feels like. It's very dry, but incredibly hot. You can feel it in your lungs, it's so hot, right? But that challenge is also a great opportunity for us, as we were talking about at lunch earlier today. Our ecosystem, our zoo is very much focused on species that can live in that kind of an environment. So we message very strongly about deserts, desert conservation, desert education, desert species, right? Which is an odd place for me to be working if I also work quite a bit in the Western Ghats, right? Which is not a desert. It's a rainforest. It's a very rich, lush place. But nonetheless, at the Living Desert, and I'll get to why that is logical that I do work there in a moment, we connect people to wildlife, and in conservation work, I work quite a lot in South Africa, We get out and we talk to people. As we were saying, people are the problem, right? People are the reason why species are being imperiled. But as a consequence of that, people are also the solution to the problem, right? If something is the problem, if you solve that problem, it becomes a solution, right? And so the reason why so many species are imperiled right now is because there's so dang many of us, right? For most of human history, we were much less than 250,000 people in the entire planet, right? Less than 250,000 people on the entire planet, right? Since the advent of medicine, we've exploded. And if you just look at that last bit and spread it out, we are exploding very recently, in particular, since just after World War II, when there was a great proliferation of a revolution in agriculture. And India was one of the leading exponents and developers of this green revolution, right? Green revolution involving fertilizers and pesticides and intensive intercropping of species. All of this were agricultural innovations. Led to the production of great much more food per unit area than previously, right? And also with antibiotics and medicine and a variety of other things. So a lot of the restrictions that were keeping our human population down have been released, or at least reduced. And so our population is exploding. The projection is somewhere close to, on this model anyway, around 11 million. Some people project much lower than that. Right now, how many people are on the planet? 0.4, I think it is. Yeah, 3 or 4, something like that. It'll be higher tomorrow. And now it's higher than it was just a second ago. And now it's higher still. Right? We're always increasing. And as you can see, I hate these terms, developed and developing, right? It's terrible terms, but this is a slide that I stole from someone else, so I'm subject to it. But in areas like Europe and North America and, well, most of it, the populations are steadying, if not reducing. You know, Japan actually has negative population growth. It's one of the very few countries in the world. I think Norway as well. But in the rest of the world, which is the vast majority of the world, including India, in this terrible word, but in that green area of the graph, population's exploding. Right? So as a consequence, this is where we get back to the Western Ghats. Right? So if you want to work and make a difference in conservation, you need to work in those areas where the impact is projected to be greatest, which is here. Right? So I've had the honor of working with AER for quite a long time, and hope to continue to as we go forward. So as our population increases, our ecological footprints increase inevitably. And not just as populations increase, but as what else increases through our economic or ecological impact increase. So not just number of people, but what else?
The food that we need and our consumption increases.
Precisely. You're on it. Extra stars for you. Extra gold stars when you go home at the end of the day, right? Because as we as cultures get richer and developed, terrible word, we use much more resources per unit person, per capita. Right? So as a consequence, even if you keep the population the same, as quality of life increases, our ecological footprint increases. Right? So this is a graph, or a chart, from the Global Footprint Network that nicely shows whether, based on the productivity of a country, whether they're consuming more than their country can produce. In total, everything. Water, food, iron, aluminum, wood, whatever it is, right? So in the red, you see some very red countries, right? We're consuming much more than our country can produce. So as a consequence, where are we getting those resources? From other countries. Which ones in particular? In a general sense. We don't have to name where they're from. But
The green ones.
the green ones, exactly, right? So we are consuming a lot, and we're getting it from other countries. For us, we get a lot of our stuff from down here, right? And also China, which is also way outstripping its resources too, right, in the US. So as a consequence, there is this kind of balance, but we are not balanced, right? As a global population, we are outstripping our resources globally, even in the green countries. Right? So those people per capita are using less, there are fewer people, so their own impact on their ecosystem is lessened, but the global impact on that country is still high, right? Greater than what this green implies. So as a consequence, we get this kind of a result that comes out. So even in the green areas, based on where you can possibly grow things to eat and consume, right? The areas that are green, that are dark green, are areas that are relatively untouched by our footprints, right? By our consumption, by our extraction, by our use, right? Areas that are red, heavily impacted. Where are we? Like right there, right? Deep red, right? You'll notice that the green areas which are untouched, are there a lot of people living in those places? No. Why not? Super cold. Extreme conditions. Great summary, right? Extreme conditions, right? Very cold, very dry, not a lot of water, right? So, where there are people, we're having an effect. Where we grow things, we are having a great effect. Right? So, how do we change that? Especially in these two places, both of which deep reds. I come from a deep red area, northern Mexico. We could call Southern California, it's kind of northern Mexico. I always call it, this part of Mexico down here is Baja California, you know? And I call it Baja California del Norte because most of San Diego County where I live is like Latino and everybody speaks Spanish. I do it as well, of course, you know. So best food, all Latino food, you know, it's all Mexican food, Salvadorian food. Anyway, so a lot of red where we are now, a lot of red where I'm coming from. So how do we change that? How do we achieve sustainability? The best way to achieve that sustainability now comes back to what we started off talking about, which is social sciences, writ large, right? Law included, economics included, psychology, key part, which is what I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about because that's what I've retrained myself as, right? So how do we achieve that? We focus on people that live where the biodiversity is most threatened. So in the Western Ghats, which Giant is going to talk about, we work a lot with communities in that area, right? Because local people are the basis of community-based conservation. Whether they are geeky biologists, presidents, or former presidents, this is Theodore Roosevelt. I should have asked you. Has anybody heard of Theodore Roosevelt? Yeah. Awesome dude, weird man, really strange person. But the father of conservation, maybe even globally, but certainly in the United States, right? Responsible for the formation of Yellowstone, which was the first national park. So whether it's geeky biologists, crazy presidents or ex-presidents, or kids in small rural communities, this is a group in Peru where I've done a lot of work as well. We need to focus on local people because local people determine our conservation legacy, right? They determine how successful a conservation project is. If the local people don't support it, the project is going to fail. 100% guaranteed, right? You put in this great park, like in California, we have all these amazing parks, right? What's up with the lights in this room? There's some phantom in the light socket or something?
Psychedelic.
Yeah, right, exactly. I don't think I took anything before I came in, but in any case, we have these amazing parks nearby where I work and live, right, in the living desert in Southern California. Has anybody heard of Joshua Tree National Park? You've heard of U2, that Joshua Tree album, amazing album. Thank you, Phantom. Really, what makes this thing happen? The magic of electricity.
There's a thunderstorm where I was.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yes. There are a lot of issues with the.
Okay. All right. Fantastic.
Going around, but it hasn't hit us yet.
Yes.
It might anymore.
So I should talk quicker, is what you're saying. Before it really does become a psychedelic experience, flashing on and off. Any case, so in the U.S., we have all these great national parks, right? Including Joshua Tree, a beautiful place, Death Valley, which is very close to where I live. Grand Canyon is not too far away, one of my favorite places in the whole world. And we have all these great parks, right, which are gazetted and protected, and everyone respects them, which is a load of crap. People go in and they hunt things, right? They want a bighorn sheep. They'll hunt it. They'll take it. Because you can't be everywhere at once to protect it, right? So even in the United States, where there's great protection of its natural lands, it's a fallacy, right? At best, it's a partial truth. A partial truth, right? And in the majority of the world, when you create protected areas, it's a significant problem. Because when you create a protected area and you've alienated the local people from being able to go into that resource, that place, and extract things that they need in order to live, right? Let alone make a business, make a livelihood, which Jonathan's going to talk a lot about, you've created enemies, right? Not only have you not created supporters of conservation, you've created people who want to undermine what you're doing. Food for thought for the future. So, boy, many stimuli in this room, isn't there? Anyway, so there's this buddy of mine, this is a friend of mine, Wesley Schultz, who's a professor at a university that I teach at as well, Cal State San Marcos in Southern California. And he wrote this paper, very influential paper, a couple years ago, 2011, called Conservation Means Behavior. And the way that we often do conservation, especially in these protected areas that I've been talking about, is to have education campaigns and outreach campaigns, and we go into the communities and we say, hey, there's these amazing animals out there and beautiful trees, and aren't these things great, and this is how they live, and this is how they reproduce, and they all need this kinds of resources, and isn't this awesome, right? This is how we do conservation very often, is through education. From that paper, he pointed out 4 important conclusions, which are, first, education is crap. Good thing to say to university. No, it's not crap. Education does not typically result in increases in pro-conservation, pro-environmental behavior, right? Telling people about how interesting animals are doesn't mean that they're not going to say, oh, that is an interesting animal. I wonder what it tastes like. Right? Knowing about an animal does not mean that they're going to appreciate it and want it to continue. Right? Fallacy number 1. Fallacy number 2 is that we are dumb people. We are dumb as a species because of what we sometimes call our simian brain, right? Our brain stem. We are very focused on short-term gains, short-term needs. I am super hungry and I'm going to run over that person to get to it. Oh my God, I'm going to go to jail because I've run over that person to get my lunch, right? So, does anybody surf here? I live in an area where like everybody surfs and everybody's pressuring me to surf, and I got no interest. This is terror. I don't know why people do this, but they do it. But they think that surfing is awesome, and they want to go out and do that. This amazing rush, James. You know, you get out there on the board and you feel the surge of the ocean. And I'm just thinking, ooh, short-term gain for long-term pain when you hit the rocks and you smash your head on it and then you're crippled, you know? So when we think about making our decisions, we're often biased towards short-term gains without thinking about long-term consequences, right? I'm hungry now. I'm going to kill the last dodo because I need to eat right now. And that is what happened to the dodo, actually. Third fallacy, that we perceive ourselves as separate from nature, right? We are in air conditioning. I got a car to get around. I don't need to walk. I can live in an incredibly hot place with 52 degrees in the summer Celsius because I have air conditioning. Right? I'm not a part of nature, right? Why this is problematic is that it makes us less concerned about the well-beingness of nature, right? If nature is different from us, if nature is an externality in the terms of economists, that we have to think about only in the degree that it will affect our bottom line. Why should I care about it? More than how it affects my bottom line, right? if we see ourselves as a part of nature, as connected to nature, as drawing sustenance from nature, we're going to think very differently. Unfortunately, it's in the minority of people that think that way. Most people think themselves as separate from nature. Fourth one, if you do something, I am more likely to do it. Social norms, right? What's normal for your social group means that you will be more likely to do it. Even if you were not a part of that group initially and you would have not been interested in doing that without being a part of that social group. I mean, not so much in college, but certainly in high school, right? We're just full-on joiners. We're like, whatever you say is good, I'll go do that, right? Oh, it's fun to hunt, the last couple hornbills. Let's go do that. That sounds great. These are problems. So, because conservation means behavior, we need to think about human behavior and how to get people to adopt these pro-environmental behaviors. There are a lot of ways that we can do this. We can legislate it. We can enforce it through law. We can make technology more efficient so that we don't need as much resources. Also, good stuff. We can invest in infrastructure so that people can cook with cleaner stoves so that they need less wood and they're less likely to damage their own health. It's great stuff. Important things. What I focus on is this fourth one. Encouraging people to adopt these pro-environmental behaviors, right? And this is the essence of conservation psychology. That bit right there, that's the distillation of my life. In 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words, right? Encourage people to adopt pro-environmental, voluntary actions at the level of the individual, right? Sometimes you do that individual stuff through social norming, which we'll get to as well. We're taking advantage of those facts, those previously common fallacies. All right, so conservation psychology, that's what I do. That's kind of the let's say the protein, not the meat, but the protein of this presentation, right? Is that behavioral change is possible when that pro-environmental behavioral change that you're trying to do is both locally appropriate and acceptable. It comes from the community, you consult with that community, you work with people from that community, they become the leads in the project, it's their interest, it's their project, they see the value in it. If you come in as an external outsider, I mean, even you all, who are all probably mostly urban folks and urbane folks, you come into a rural community in the Western Ghats, you'll have about as much credibility as I will. Maybe more. I got none. So maybe you'll have like 1 unit of credibility as opposed to the 100 that you need, So this is a great book. If you're really interested in conservation psychology, I'm going to talk about some of the essences about how you do it. Just in a real small nutshell here. This is a great one by Susan Clayton and Jean Myers. This is the one that I use when I teach this class at Cal State San Marcos. Kind of dense. Could have been written better, but it's the only one we have at present, so that's where we're at. But it's a good book as a distillation introduction to the concept. A lot of conservation psychology is based on this theory, this model of behavioral change, called value belief norms, which is that our behavior is dependent on our norms, our social norms, our cultural norms, our individual norms, to whom we ascribe responsibility for our behavior. If you're more likely to do it, then I'm going to do it because I've ascribed you the responsibility for my behavior, right? Those norms come from beliefs, which are influenced by how aware we are of what we're experiencing, right? And that comes from our core values. And those core values come from a lot of different parts. One part can be how we view ourselves and how, if what I do benefits me on an egoistic way, that's what egoism means, right? What does this mean for me? What's in it for me? Right? Another part is, we all have all of these, incidentally, too, of course. How altruistic we are. How likely am I to put myself out to sacrifice my own well-being, my own resources, the time that I could otherwise be lounging on the television or on the couch watching some Bollywood movie, right? And instead go out and plant trees, dig a well, right? That's altruism. Sometimes from tradition, whether that's from your family, your community, broader culture, country sometimes. And lastly, how open you are to change, right? Those are all aspects that feed into your personal value system and determine your personal value system. Does that make sense? Right. This value belief norm thing comes from Stern's paper from 2000. We can talk more about that later if you're keen on it. But in order to get people to change, influence their behavior through activism, public behaviors, private behaviors, behaviors in supporting other organizations, you need to influence some step here. Right? So if you're a lawyer, or take it back, if you're a politician, and you can pass laws, how are you influencing things? What level of the values, beliefs, norms, model for behavioral change are you changing? Because you're changing behavior, right? You're legislating activity, right? So what level of that process are you influencing if you're a politician, legislator? The gremlins in the room are also affecting my computer. Where is it coming in? How are you changing the behavior of people? Are you changing their self-transcendence, their values, their egoism? No, not so much, right? Values, beliefs, and norms.
Beliefs can be directly
Changed by law?
no, not by law, but by the perception
By
of
law.
the politician, the person whose beliefs can be.
Oh, that's interesting. So the beliefs of that person could influence how likely you are to...
The way the person projects himself to
Yes.
the public sphere, since he's a politician
Yes.
fighting for a political scene, in that case his beliefs or his way of projection in the public will inculcate the good beliefs and bring about the behavioral change.
Oh, I see. So you're saying how that politician actually lives his beliefs could influence people's likelihood to conform to the law. That's a nice wrinkle. I'm just thinking even easier than that. That's a very nice observation, though.
Since they can make laws, so maybe if they give if they make, I mean from my point, I think they can do it through norms. Once you have specific norms and people are sometimes obliged to, like if we say that if you litter in the ground, so you will be charged. So when they have that sort of a pressure through norms, that's when the change will come. Even through how the CSR in India also works, it's because we wanted to achieve SDGs, so we needed a national law to achieve them.
Right, for the purpose of responsibility. Yeah, exactly. Right? Bingo. Right? Because laws ascribe responsibility to the government. Right? So when they say you can't speed, that's an ascription of responsibility to that sign that says you can't speed, right? Which was really put there by a politician, of course, right? Very good, awesome. All right. So now, if you are a psychologist or a sociologist, and you are working with communities at the individual level, and you're trying to get them to change their behaviors, where are you working on things? Values. How would it be values? Who said values?
The second one would be more appropriate. If
Uh-huh.
I'm a psychologist,
Uh-huh.
so I would like to like what the IIHEd does. In that sense, we can just help with the community livelihoods and bring about the behavioral change in the value system.
Okay, very nice, absolutely. Right, so you can help to influence anyway their value system by helping to find out what it is and then build on making that resource more valuable to them. Okay, yeah, it's a perceptive change.
Is it like what they should do or what they are doing?
Pick one and answer. Pick one and answer.
No, I mean, if you ask me, so what they should be doing is maybe for the good of the people, they can change the values and all. I mean, they should be trying to do that. But I think what they mostly do is do the first one. Like they try to make people believe that what do they get out of this deal or whatever that's going on.
Okay. I could see that. So the self-enhancement.
It's self-enhancement.
Right. Change how they perceive that resource from their own value. I had a friend of mine when I was at Columbia, another professor, who wanted to write a book that he never did, and I'm so upset with him that he never did. It was called What's in It for Me? The Selfish Person's Guide to Environmentalism. Which I just loved. It was a great title, and he never wrote it, and he collected all these articles, and I brainstormed with him about like topics of titles and how to go about each chapter, and he never wrote the damn thing. It's a beautiful topic, right? I mean, really, that's what we need. Like, why should I care about conserving something? Tell me why. Tell me why. Once you tell me why, okay. Yes.
To really add to what you said just now, and looking at it from a perspective of a supply chain of providing something that is conservative in nature, not only from the side of the producer, if you tell him that using this methodology would do you good, I think it also matters at the consumer end. And only when they engage with it, when they know that it's good for them, do they want to get involved in it more. Okay. And like you said, that as individuals, we do not see ourselves very connected to nature. But once we add that angle of ourselves being our personal motive being we'll be at advantage by using that certain product which uses a conservative method of production, that's when we really start engaging with it. Or we might want to even pay a higher price for using a product that uses certain techniques of conservation.
So because of the personal perception of the value of that resource. Yeah. Okay. All right. It can also be kind of a self-identification too, right? So not just your value system, but also your beliefs and who you want to be a part of.
Yes.
Ooh, I like that group. They do interesting things. Oh, well, why are they doing that? Oh, they think that it's important not to do that thing because it has this negative effect. Well, that's an interesting point. I should think about that. So, depending upon how you pitch the product, the short of it is that all of you are right. It depends on how you perceive the social science that you want to do, right? How you pitch it, how you want to act, what you want to emphasize.
I think branding and advertising also plays a major role.
Super. Absolutely, it does.
The better the marketing, the better is the reaction of your audience.
My very next slide. Well played. Yes, and we'll move on.
I just have a question, since we're talking about changing the core values, but isn't that said that your core values are very difficult to change? So when you look at the beliefs, you will make the other person realize that if you do this, these are the consequences you'll have to face, or the people around you will have to face. So you have to probably change the belief, make them aware of the consequences their actions will lead to.
Yes. That's very right. You're absolutely right. And that reminds me of another thing. It's sometimes easiest for people to change their behavior. It's a little harder, but still relatively easier to change what norms they want to adopt, right? Like, I like that group. I want to be a part of that. It's a little harder to change their belief system. And it's incredibly hard to change someone's value system, right? So as you go from left to right, very difficult to much easier. That's why politicians focus on this area, depending upon how they pitch the law. Sometimes it's a description of responsibility, sometimes it's personal responsibility to take action, right? So it's much harder to change someone's belief system, even harder to change someone's core value system. Easier to change their beliefs, their actions, their behaviors, right? That's why we can get people to recycle, but it's harder for people to stop using things altogether, right? To use a recyclable or reusable bottle, for example, right? People are like, oh yeah, I'll totally recycle that plastic bottle because that's easy, it doesn't affect me, it doesn't change my lifestyle, with the quick and easy kind of grab, drink, throw away, move on, as opposed to, oh my God, I don't want to have more plastic in the world, so now I have to carry around this damn reusable bottle all the time, right? Which is a harder system to change. Make sense? Okay. All right. So last couple things before I hand it over. Community-based social marketing is an application of marketing approaches to behavior change, to encourage people to do behavior change. And it builds on those 4 observations that we talked about earlier that Wes Schultz had put together. This is a great website that was put together by Doug Mackenzie Moore, who was one of the innovators for this field. It's a great website, cbsm.com. Under the book thing, he's got an entire book there that I've used to teach my class with. Much more readable than that conservation psychology book. But this is also much more focused. It's very applied. The conservation psychology is more theoretical in general, right? So they serve different purposes. But this cbsm.com is a great website, a great resource. Go to the book link in particular. It'll give you all the thumbnails of all of this. And I'm going to give you the thumbest of the thumbnails, the smallest, maybe the little fingernail instead of the thumbnail, which is bigger. All right, so his book is the thumbnail. Here's my little fingernail. CBSM is all community-based social marketing. CBSM is all about addressing barriers and benefits. Because most behavior change that you're asking people to do have both barriers and benefits. There's a reason why they don't want to do it, which is a barrier. And there's reasons why maybe they would, which are the benefits. Right? And so if you think of motivation being these wavy lines, so this being the perception of benefits, right? The motivation being the perception of benefits. And then the black line being the wall, the barriers to adoption, right? In this case, where the benefits are perceived to be less valuable than the barrier is an obstacle, is behavior change going to happen? No. Right? It will not happen because of that. Because the barriers are greater than the benefits. I'm sorry. The perception of the barriers is greater than the perception of the benefits. It's all about perception, right? And that's why marketing is important, because marketing influences perception, right? It changes what you think, how you think sometimes, which is scary. So, if we talk about the first one, talk about the barriers. Because what we could do is have the same level of motivation, right? The same kind of height, but reduce the barriers. Right? So going into that simple thing about the recycling. You know, before recycling barrels were everywhere and a lot of communities around the world had curbside recycling, you used to have to bring your recycling, and maybe in a lot of communities in India, apologies for my ignorance, you used to bring your recycling to a place. You drive to this place, you drop it off, and you get like nothing for it. Right? But aside from the satisfaction that your core values were met. Right? Pretty significant barrier. You can reduce that barrier by having curbside recycling. So you just have a bin and you're like, do I throw it in this one or this one? There's not much of a difference to me. But one is a recycling and one is a garbage. So you reduce the barriers. Same level of motivation, behavior change happens. Make sense? Okay. So second situation. Here's the baseline. We increase the benefits. So the barrier stays the same. Barrier is still the barrier, still is challenging to recycle stuff or adopt whatever the behavior change is. But in this case, we increase the benefits. So, sticking again with the recycling thing. A lot of states in the United States have a deposit on the bottles. You pay a nickel, 5 cents when you buy a bottle of soda, right? And then you get that 5 cents back when you redeem it, when you take it back to the store. Right? So you had to lay out this money, but then you get it back. And homeless people or people who are just into making a lot of money with picking up recycling will go along the roadsides and pick up all the bottles and take them in and get that money, right? A lot of people in some states in the United States where it's 10 cents a bottle, like in Michigan, which is where I was born, You can make a livelihood off of picking up bottles off the side of the road. Or at least you used to, because now there's no bottles on the side of the road, because everyone recycles these damn things, because they're 10 cents a bottle, right? So everyone recycles, right? So you increase the benefits. Barriers are still the same. Make sense? That, in a nutshell, is CBSM. Either through perception change, through infrastructure change, whatever it is. Community-based social marketing happens that way. This is how you implement it. You select the behavior, you identify the barriers and benefits, and figure out how to reduce the barriers or increase the benefits or perceptions, if not the actual barriers and benefits. Develop a strategy, you pilot test it, maybe change it a little bit so it improves, and then you implement it on a bigger scale. It's a quick walk through a very useful tool, which is CBSM. All right? I'm going to jump past this just in the interest of time. So, social sciences, I would say, are not just helpful for conservation success, that they help ensure it. Their interdisciplinarity is essential to make conservation happen. So all of you who are, how many would identify as a social scientist of one sort or another? In my very broad sense, right? Law and economics and sociology, psychology. Okay, those of you who aren't putting your hand up, you need to have your hand up too. Pretty much all of you are. Right, because everything could be put into this realm, anything involving people. Whether it's directly with conservation, or maybe with education, or maybe with health, nursing, getting people to adopt healthy behaviors, could be in the form of using a cleaner burning stove, which uses less wood and benefits the forest because it reduces deforestation, right? Or whether if you're in computer sciences, still has lots of applications. Sharing of data, processing of data, very important things for conservationists. If you're in business, super important, especially with this corporate social responsibility, which we're going to hear much more about. So these things come together to help ensure that success of conservation. Social sciences are a core part. They're not an incidental or side point to biology conservation success. And you all at this university are uniquely situated to help us out. So, thank you for your time. That's my info. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, James. I'd like to introduce our latest guest here, who's just unfortunately got late because of the traffic. He's Shubhamoy. He's an editor of a very premier environmental magazine in India, Down to Earth, a sample which I showed you yesterday. And he's from the Center for Science and Environment. So he's very kind to come all the way from Delhi to essentially join in our conversation. And I've met Shubhamoy before in Delhi. And we've had very nice exchanges and conversations. And it was my hope that you'd actually come here, because we're just starting this seminar series on environment and development, particularly focusing on conservation and livelihoods. And here we have the opportunity of someone from California who's taught at Columbia for 20 years, but who got to 18 countries, working with conservation and communities. And here we have the advantage of someone for the last 2 decades who has started a conservation and livelihood environmental NGO based out of Pune, Applied Environmental Research Foundation, and does amazing work. And it's Jen will then walk you through the model. I just wanted to basically, having introduced you, welcome again to our university, to our community. I think this is the first time you're coming.
It's the first time.
And Richard had been here.
Richard had been here.
Richard is a colleague of Shubhamoy's. Richard is the managing editor of the Center for Science and Environment. Managing editor of the Down to Earth of the Center for Science and Environment. So with these, James, I'd really like to thank you for taking us through a rapid tour of sustainability. Now you see the clear intersection of how conservation psychology can now impact change of organizational behavior. And corporate social responsibility is all about impacting the change of behavior. In this particular context, I'd like to request actually my research assistant Vaishali to just run through one slide to get the students in the conversation, and not just the presenters and the academics, but also the students who are at the center of the community. So Vaishali, Vasant, who just left, unfortunately, yet had to make a presentation, and both of them have been my research assistants. I acknowledge my deep gratitude to them. They've been excellent researchers, besides being excellent students. And the three of us, since the last 6 months, the research that we have done, detailed mapping of spending of the Indian corporate social responsibility and how corporations in India can be impacted to change their behavior, particularly in the conservation in environment. And we have tracked down how CSR number 4, that I've often talked about in my class, often gets the least amount of money. In the last 4 years, the corporations have been spending to the amount of about $7 to $8 billion US. So Vaishali is going to run you through one slide, which is essentially going to crystallize the research over 6 months in one slide. However, ambitious that may sound.
Is it alright if I?
Education and health are in billions, and the rest of them are in millions. And of the total CSR spend, which is close to $4 billion, environment receives barely 8%. And I agree that education and health are very important, but as Dr. James has already pointed out, these environment tends to take a backseat in our priorities when it comes to development. So this is a mapping that has been done by various organizations. I have a table that shows them clearly in the next one. But this has been done by an Indian newspaper, Livelihoods, the one to the left, and the one to the right has been done by the KPMG, the consultancy, and both of them try and map out the CSR areas in the Schedule 7 to various SDGs. So the government has given to the companies a schedule that lists out 11 areas, which is more of a suggestion of how they can spend their corporate social responsibility money. And as you can see, in this, environment has the highest number of mapping with SDGs. In both the mappings, both for the Livelihoods and the KPMG, environment coincides with the highest number of SDGs. Although there are slight differences in how they have mapped them, like for example, Livelihoods felt that responsible consumption and production has to be a part of environmental sustainability, but KPMG felt otherwise. There are these slight differences, but more or less, it is one of the most important, and it has the highest amount of correlation, and therefore, consequently, the highest amount of benefits when we invest on it. But the previous picture says otherwise. This does not show the same fact. So, we just wanted to, yes?
May I ask, why do you think that is?
Like you already pointed out, in conservation psychology, we just feel that we are more important than the environment, even though without the environment, we cannot exist.
Yeah. I think I have a different take on this, because we are segregating so many things, and we don't understand the, for example, look at the safe drinking water itself. There is a big concept.
Yes.
We don't know what is safe. We just talk about drinking water and its connection to forests. Health of the forest, and sustainable supply of water.
Yes.
So if you do a further inquiry into those initiatives, you will then understand that all these is actually a reflection of degraded environment. So it's more or less a spending on environment, but we are giving huge cost, price. We are paying huge price for degraded environment, and we are investing in the wrong area. For example, we are looking at end of the pipe treatment for everything. For example, setting up water filtration tanks near in the villages because there is a lot of sedimentation in the water. It has come because the forest on the hills has been chopped and then the rivers are sedimented. So if you really go back to the root cause and tell the corporates that your spending is not wrong, but you are better advised to spend there to get this, your investment will not be sustainable. So that is how we need to, there is nothing that we can separate from nature. Even this table, whatever we have here is made out of nature. If we can create an understanding, the entire funding will be just under one category, nature.
Yes.
And we have to make them understand. The problem is that they are spending because there is no guideline or even basically capacity building or orientation for them to understand that this is agriculture, for example. Also, we are investing in agriculture for what? Increasing productivity or making it more sustainable? And sustainable, again, we are using those words without thinking what is sustainable. So if we have organic agriculture, and I think that is what is already happening in Sikkim. Why Sikkim is a state, now the government has declared completely organic. Do you think that we have made investments there? No, we have not. Government has got nothing, but the local communities actually understand way better than anybody else how to live in harmony with nature, how to reduce, because they don't have means to buy fertilizers. That's the same thing in Konkan, in where we work, in Northern Western Ghats. There is the external input in form of fertilizers or anything. It's so minimum that you can consider that, for example, these two districts can be declared organic because there are absolutely nothing that they are buying. So this is the understanding that we need to create among the people who got money and who got some legislation and they have to spend by 31st of March. They have compulsions. So, but that is where they get confused, and that is our responsibility to actually guide them, or instead of segregating this, actually how we can establish clear relationship between safe drinking water and health of the forest.
Yes. Yes, as Sir Rafi said, there's almost nothing that cannot be interlinked to the environment, and it's very necessary that we need to think of it as a part of our lives as well, and to keep things in consideration while taking any decisions. It is for this reason why we felt that it'll be great to have you here, sir, because it is such case studies that need to illustrate that fact.
No, but don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing what you've done.
No,
I'm just trying to highlight
totally
where
right.
where we can go wrong. And people with a lot of money, they're not applying their minds. You have just done the analysis. But the majority of the work that they have done, I would say investment, it is their job and they are just analyzing.
Yes.
So you actually you have brought that to our attention, to our notice, that this is how they do not link it to environment category. They don't link drinking water to environment category, which is a shame. So it's a shame on them. And that's our job, to orient them, to actually create that interdisciplinary perspective, or rather say how this can be more or less aligned, and how more and more, I won't call corporates, more and more investments, whether they are made through public resources, they are made through individuals. We are looking at not grants or funding. Don't look at CSR spend as funding and grants, but as an investment in natural infrastructure. That's the end of the story. There is nothing else that is happening. This is what is happening. They might put it in different jargons or words which suit their image or something, but we should understand that's an investment and that is required.
Thank you very much, Vaishali. Thank you once again, Jay.
Indicators for our performance when we talk about how it has contributed to conservation, because that is our focus, and obviously it is generating livelihoods to farmers at 2 different locations. These supply chains are actually in Bhimashankar and Sangmeshwar. So we work in 2 different locations for 2 different species. And we also give people, this is the certification, the material has been collected and tagged. The Fair Wild certification is an international social standard, and AERF is the only Fair Wild certified operator right now in South Asia. So this could be a great advantage, but it also talks about significant ignorance among the Ayurvedic drug manufacturers. They have no clue from where they are sourcing all these Bibitaki and Haritaki for making Triphala. Triphala is such an old medicine in India. I mean, it must be in use for like more than 500 years. But people really don't know that the habitat of those trees are equally important for sustainability of other species, that they're just making money. I can tell you great examples of ignorance. So these are cook stores that we give, and then we also have set up the bee boxes in those forests which are certified, so that you can collect honey, so that more and more income is added to the primary stakeholder, is the owner of the tree. So this is my last example. I won't go further considering the time. We're talking about the biofuels. Probably this is one of the most mainstreamed solution to climate change mitigation. But I think the implementation of this strategy is mired with controversies. People at CSE must be knowing that there's a food versus fuel debate. Everything about biofuel is negative. Obviously, there are reasons because of the wrong policy of the government of planting jatropha or some 1 or 11 million hectares. I don't know where this land is going to come from. But so let us not talk about the negativities, but look at what are the opportunities. So we thought of conducting surveys we thought of promoting mainstreaming the use of native oilseed species. That we have some 200 native oilseed species in India, while the government thought that jatropha, which comes from Mexico, that should be planted here. It's an amazing thing. So select areas with maximum resource availability. That means do resource assessment, set up something which is decentralized, and create local income generation, and also provide access to cleaner energy to communities. So these are. This is the mill which processes about 4 tons of oilseeds per day, and then it was directly used in the tractor. This is a person who has actually tried to conduct a feasibility of this initiative for certification. There is another certification called as the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterial Certification. So this guy is an auditor of that, and he thought that this could be another interesting study. So impacts for conservation. So these are the 3 species that we focused on from the 200, and the enterprise that we established on, based on those resources, they have been running for last 10 years. For Pongamia pinnata, it is running in Alibag since 2007, and for Maduka indica, we have set up those centers in Bandara and Raigad district. And I think it's an environmental sustainable energy alternative that is created at doorsteps. That we are not talking about what the mainstream biodiesel industry is doing. What we are looking at, that how people can substitute diesel, in tractors or irrigation pump sets. Or the prime example where you don't have to prove the point is that the expeller runs on the same oil. So you don't need to tell people that this is a substitute to diesel. A Pongamia pinnata oil is excellent substitute to diesel. So people produce that, and the same expeller runs on. So that unit, that center is energy independent. So I think I should come to the conclusion of this talk. So these are our partners in progress. This is a long journey, and so we work with, I think the main partners are the local communities from these districts, and then many supporters, private sector partners, academic institutions like the DICE, and even the banks like Credit Suisse, Daikin. So ultimately the objective is or what we think is they provide other species the freedom to be. Thank you.
So let's have a chat in the dark. Sure. Dark and light. So thank you very much, Jayant. I mean, it was fantastic. In an apparent sustainable development goals, why I started focusing on the environment and why it was important to talk about the environment. So we started off this conversation because in this particular social sciences focused university, good that this university is, amazing work that they're doing. But in that absence of it, the young generation here, who as educators we are training to be basically young men and women who will make policies, frame policies, be it in organizations or be it in government, be it in international organizations. I thought that it's our moral obligation to basically talk about this philosophical connection that we have lost as a human species and we are fast losing with nature, and why it is important, first of all, philosophically. And second of all, from the strategic perspective of that our country largely is resource dependent, biomass dependent, right? So when we are talking about economic poverty, and you talked about, we can define that poverty, I think we can also talk about ecological poverty. And energy poverty. So these kinds of poverties, should be discussed very much, I think, in the light of courses. So in this context, the students that I've had, they actually, after the initial few barriers, I think they really performed marvelously. And to give you a little bit of a sample of the experience of the case studies of AERF that we started doing and the conservation of Western Ghats. So just to get the students' perspective into the picture in this discussion about their first experiences of applying their theoretical knowledge, whether they came from public policy or whether they came from international affairs or whether they came from business, how to basically apply their knowledge to make a difference in this particular area when you're connecting change of corporate organizations and bringing about conservation. So I wanted to invite actually just very briefly Spandan, if you talk about, for example, the research that your group did with certification. And then I will bring about.
I have a question.
Sure.
Before we get into presentation.
Sure. Please.
I have a question for Jan sir. So we talked about these threats and we talked about the engagement with your organization, with local communities. What I wanted to know was the role of politics in enhancing or pulling back of these conservation activities.
Yeah.
So what would you have to say on that?
It's an appropriate question because I think something that I missed out on during my presentation is about what how policies were formed, how, for example, the previous government, what effort they made. The reason for that decision to engage in that kind of the forming of those policies, which were pro-conservation for the Western Ghats, was the movement, the Save the Western Ghats movement, and that the Save the Western Ghats movement march that was conducted about 30 years ago in 1987. And that group was revived. They revived this movement in 2009, and they started again conducting meetings with the local state. And that was a group of activists, but also NGOs, but no government represented in there. And they actually, after all these long years, they took a stock of the things in the Western Ghats. And they prepared some very impressive presentations. And in the conference in 2010, in Kodagiri, they made these presentations. And my friend, colleague at AERF, Ajana, was She was part of the civil rights movement in 1987, and she was also there during the revival of this march movement. And then they made this presentation to J.R. Ramesh, who was the environment minister in those days, and he took that decision immediately to form the Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel in 2010. So the mandate that they gave to the panel, which was headed in those days by Dr. Madhav Gadgil, was to demarcate ecologically sensitive areas in the entire Western Ghats, so that so-called development projects which actually can cause or devastate the ecology of Western Ghats can be avoided in the first place at the planning stage itself. So this demarcation exercise took about a year and a half, and so they did use the spatial tools and map all these 5 states, and they came up with this idea. Professor Karthik was saying that the entire Western Ghats should be considered ecologically sensitive, which is practically impossible considering the planned investments by private sector players, government interest in developing infrastructure. So that was impractical. So what happened after that is the government appointed another high-level working group, which was headed by Mr. Subramaniam, and he did another exercise, and he said that we cannot declare entire Western Ghats to be ecologically sensitive, but let's do this again, and then so reassess the whole thing. So he came up with a figure of around that's 70,000 square kilometers of the Western Ghats should be demarked as a ecologically sensitive region, and they considered village as a unit, which made this whole exercise very easy for people to understand. So they made these villages, they made this list of villages and communicated to the village governing bodies that in this block, for example, these many villages are in the IIHEd. And I think that has created obviously a problem, but also opportunities for conservation, and identifying opportunities for conservation. And with a lot of reluctance, I would say, that this government came up with this notification that these villages are now ecologically sensitive, so that you cannot, for example, in some villages that we work, like 200 villages, you cannot have mining. You cannot have open cast mining, and there's no other way you can do mining. So
oh, really? Okay.
Sorry? Yeah, hospitals are coming here.
So we'll sweat.
These species are any numbers.
Sorry?
These species are any numbers.
Yeah, that is. So I think that is how policy can do. But again, if there are quite a few things that have happened after this. The notification has come into force, that a lot of politicians actually misinform local people that if your village is in this list of ecological sensitive area, you will not have development. And so a lot of village governing bodies actually prepared this resolution that we don't want to be considered in this list. Now they did not understand that something which has gone through the process and actually become a notification. Your resolution at local level doesn't make sense. But then they created this, and a lot of people say, how I'm going to survive, and that changes the local government. That for example in the next election, people who have completely different ideas of development, they start influencing policy, and they forget about what is ecologically sensitive. What do you mean by some area is ecologically sensitive? Nobody has an idea. It's very difficult. It's a nice phrase, but if we ask this question, that what do you mean by ecologically sensitive? Then they have actually those parameters, that the slope of the grass, and that it is raining so much, and then obviously diversity, species. If these three things are the threats, so then this makes and what eventually is going to happen is that this connection was made very clear that if we lose forests, there will be no rains. There is this new understanding And you need, that's why you need science, you need these scientific publications about to establish this connection that how much of the rains are recycled back, in form of precipitation for the next year. And that's mammoth, that's a huge figure for the Western Ghats, that anywhere between 8 to 20% of the rainfall is recycled back to vegetation and creates moisture. So they create rains again. We cannot actually use hydrology as a tool to understand how forests conserve water. That is way complicated. But this is far more, and that's how in geography, whatever we learn, we think that the oceans are only responsible for making rains. But it's not only, it's just partially true. It's along with oceans, forests play important roles in precipitation. And as you go far from the sea, that becomes more and more prominent. This classical case is Amazon, where about 35% of the rainfall is recycled. So if you get, and that's so we are calculating. We have some astronomical figures for the 5,000 acres of forest, and you can actually calculate that in terms of liters. For example, if annual precipitation of 3,300 millimeters falls on 1 acre of forest, how much that means in terms of liters? And so that is how we have calculated, because it's very difficult. So what we have done is that convert 5,000 acres of forest into number of trees and number of liters of water that you will get by maintaining this, because this is Western Ghats, there is a scientific evidence for it. So this is another way of influencing policy, that use science.
So
Sorry, yeah.
Absolutely, please.
It's a good problem. On the one hand, we have ignorance,
Yes.
and on the other hand, we have a nature which is unkind, which is no more delivering to its subjects. So, if you, I was just looking at this IIT Bombay study which has appeared last week. It says that all of you must be aware of this dispute between Tamil Nadu and Karnataka over the Kaveri watershed. So there are two arguments that have surfaced. That is, one is the natural flow of the river has declined. The states and the downstream are not getting water, and the rainfall deficit is also a problem. Now, this study says that Western Ghats contributes 40% of southwest monsoon rain in Tamil Nadu alone. Yeah. And in the three most rain deficit years, 95, 99, and 2003, it contributed 60% of Tamil Nadu's rain. So, if we can't save Western Ghats, forget about more southwest monsoon in Tamil Nadu. That is a problem.
Yeah, that's what I tried to tell you. That's
so on the one hand, at the ground level, we have ignorance which you can counter with information and incentives.
Exactly, yeah.
And on the other hand, you have this unkind nature.
Right. The problem, though, too, with that kind of a situation is that you're talking
in California also, you experiencing wildfires.
We're crazy.
And then followed by mudslides.
Yeah. We have 120 golf courses in Palm Desert. We get less than 4 inches of rain a year, right? Which is what, 12 centimeters of rain a year, which is nothing, right? We have 120 golf courses. Golf courses have an insane amount of water. But going back to what you were saying, a problem with with that kind of an argumentation at the community level is that it's hard to mobilize people to act on global issues, right? So I see the problem with climate change. I see the problem with us having less water. I still need to water my plants though. I still need to grow my crops. I still need to be able to have enough water to be able to make my living, right? To grow my cattle or whatever it is that I'm going to grow. So, maybe I can cut it back 1%, which is not going to make any big impact on a larger scale. It's much easier when you can manifest a problem. This is the basis of one of the basic tenets of American psychology. When you can manifest that problem at the local scale, very fine-grained, so that you do this and you see this. So the idea of saying that a hectare of the Western Ghats would produce you 100 liters of water per day, or something like that, right? That's something that you can then quantify and say, oh, okay, well I can keep that hectare of land. It's going to provide me this much water.
But instead of saying, you know, if you conserve that hectare of land, you will help contribute to fighting desertification and drops in water levels in this important region, and you're going to help conserve and maintain the western monsoon season. Yeah. That's not how you pitch a narrative, you know? That's not how you talk about stuff. That's not marketing.
So,
right? Marketing matters.
So I just have a question.
Sure.
Yeah. How do we convince a government like the one we have right now about the scientific facts you are mentioning when they are actually contesting the concept of science itself? We contest the concept of science itself. There is no evolution theory, there is no Darwin. So how do you convince them about these facts?
that's a fundamental problem with the ideology, right?
Of the
Yes.
No, you have to forgive people for the ignorance.
But I think they're going to come back to that ignorance.
No, but see, you have to, again,
The good majority.
you have to have the march for science also in India, like they have in US right now for fighting climate change. I mean, they're against bad policies of climate change in US. The march for
We have a
science.
bigger idiot than we're having.
Yeah, exactly. And
you got an idiot. We got an idiot.
So
it really, I think my answer to your question is you vote them out. You work on politics. You work on a political level. You mobilize people who do listen to science, who do understand the centrality and importance of this stuff. And you motivate people and you mobilize people to vote.
Because that is why I'm going.
You're not going to change their opinion.
We're having an important conversation like this on May the 9th, 2018, amongst about 25 students, 2 guests, 1 media person, 1 couple of faculty and colleagues. So this is where, I mean, I think the intersection between what we could do, how we can apply our knowledge, what is important, how important is ecology, is that these kind of conversations. And also I was very keen that the Center for Science and Environment is the premier think tank for the environment and science coming here. Join us in this discussion, because you also develop these readers for young college and university students all across the country, and you collaborate with faculty members and educational institutions. And I think this kind of a conversation, this kind of a dialogue, this kind of a model that's scaled up at various different institutions through academia, NGO partnership, community organization partnerships. And I think if more and more students could get the opportunity of internships, of actually working with something like AERA at the community level, in that kind of a deep case study that Jan provided, which is lying at the intersection of so many worlds: public policy, corporate social responsibility, livelihood creation, ecological economics, environment. So many different interdisciplines can come together in just one intervention. It can be the fantastically integrated. We call ourselves an interdisciplinary university, but if we have discussions like this, the interdisciplinary nature of our discussion and our scholarship comes into, I think, life here, right?
I'd like to know how you would answer your question.
Oh, there is one
I'd like to know how you would answer your question along those lines.
The interdisciplinary response.
Or how you would deal with leaders who don't see science as a valid option.
I think the should be working out of our next
no, I think that's not the option, because I think the other option is equally bad. So you're not going to get rid of ignorant politicians anywhere in the world. What we have to do is, exactly. So actually, if they know the understanding, if you get this understanding right, that because they're investing in so much in creating those ponds for water, that if you establish this link and just tell them this is hard facts, and this is in economic terms, the way that you start communicating with science, then definitely they will understand, because they are going to lose elections if they cannot address the water scarcity issue. They understand that very much. So voting them out is not a solution, because you're going to, again, as I mentioned, so you have fresh new idiots to work on. So it's better to have somebody actually for a longer term, so that you can convince someone.
They're married many other friends also.
Sorry?
They're married many other friends also.
Yeah, but that's
another debate.
Yeah.
So you had a question?
Yeah, I did have a question, but just addition to what you were saying, nothing to do with that. But I was just wondering, and as he said that the water level has gone down to an extent, and the river, the rainwater has also gone down to an extent. Even in the presentation, we saw that the entire presentation was, and the presentation starting was Western Ghats. And for me, Ghat means a place where it's a bank of a river side. But there are very less photographs of the river also, of the water, so it has gone so down. Just on a lighter note.
So a bit of a quick discussion to get just 2 minutes of the student's perspective of having done this case study and this experience. So Spandan, very quickly, in about 2-3 minutes.
So our group has researched certifications related to coffee and aromatic plants. So what we have understood is certification is totally voluntary, standards set by various agencies, and there are many certifying agencies such as Fair World, we talked about, like Fair Trade, Red Forest Alliance for coffee. As a result of different tools and standards used by those agencies, the standards vary. Okay, so mainly the advantages that we see in certification, it ensures survival of wild sphere of the habitat. It preserves tradition and culture, as you explained. It also incentivizes the farmers. It gives an assurance to consumers that the products are produced in a socially and ecologically sound manner. So and as a result of which the consumer awareness increases as a result of certification. And the demand for those ethical products also rises, as a result of which there is a scope of investment in this sector. My question is, how can this certification process can be made more cheaper? Number one, first question. Secondly, how can CSR be used to leverage this process of certification? These are my 2 questions.
So before we take this, before we take this question, let's listen to the Public Policy Group in terms of what has been your experience with this case study in terms of your the learning experience.
Sure. So as a collective group public policy students, we have drawn lessons from these 2 case studies from a policy perspective and have come up with some conclusions on that. First of all, it was that, as we have talked about in class, that while we are only spending $380 million rupees on this, and it's only 8% of the total CSR money, at the same time, CSR 4 is actually linked to 7 SDG goals, and it's linked, and recently Vivek Debroi was here, and he was talking about the same thing we have talked about in the class, that any country can't focus on all the 164 targets. You have to pick out some targets, 169 targets. You have to pick out some targets and focus on them. So, as you were saying, it's all about privatization here. And when we can focus on 7 SDG goals and 70 targets by focusing on environment, which is much above education or health. I'm not saying that we should focus on health and education. At the same time, environment has to be given more prioritization, because clearly it has a lot of things at stake, 7 SDG goals and 70 targets. Moreover, we realize after studying the 2 case studies that there's a lack of coordination among different agencies. As you were saying in your presentation, that politicians don't agree. There needs to be a perception change. I totally agree that there needs to be a perception change, because they have to be told things in the manner they understand. They have to be told that if you don't do this, the people, the tribal community there won't understand this. And while reading those 2 case studies, and as we discussed in class as well, the awareness needs to be built at both local level and the educated level. By educated level, I mean in universities like such, because when we were talking about the organic coffee, or we might talk about trifla and all these medicinal plants, there in those cases, people from Jindal Global University and all these universities can actually understand what's going on, and there could be a trickle-down effect because of that. As you were saying, when you went to tell them that we want to help you, the local community, and they told you that, oh, they are here to grab our land, and it took you time to develop that trust relationship. So probably knowledge centers like JGU can actually help in that regard. Moreover, the steps the identification of market is also very important here, because the usage of market as organic coffee, what are the benefits you are getting out of it? If you are actually focusing on helping out these poor people by taking medicines which are developed through a systematic process which isn't exploiting these indigenous people, what are the benefits coming out of it for the world and for you? And moreover, we talked about how there's a poor policy support and infrastructural support, which I've already talked about, and how we need to integrate these tribal communities because they're quite excluded and have a different, they have a kind of a threat perception towards the people outside their community. We have to develop that trust relationship and go forward.
So, thank you very much.
Making by adopting the biodiversity friendly practices. So to make the market, you have to do the marketing, the sales, promotion, and also the business have to concentrate on their supply chains. So the supply chains, they should be built in such a manner they are not harming the environment.
Like Body Shop, they use some campaign like against animal testing. So we can do something like make a product. So we can do some campaigning against which, like, we don't use the animals and all, like we are overexploiting the natural resources for Trifla we make, so we're exploiting them. So we need to make some of this practice sustainable and profitable as well, so that we can take care of the environment and our profit as well.
So thank you very much, and yeah.
If you still have 5 more minutes for one question, one last question. I've always found it very good. I'm an economics major in my undergraduate, and I've always found it very difficult to grapple with their version of environmental economics, because you constantly keep talking about an optimal amount of pollution. And the optimal amount of pollution, what is now may not be the same tomorrow or the day after. However, it takes you, I don't know, probably weeks or months to come down to what the optimal amount of pollution is. And you're constantly also talking about you should have, suppose you should have that industry that pollutes if the benefit from the industry is greater than the cost to the environment, and concepts like these. And it does not really make sense in this case, and also that cost benefit analysis depends a lot on how you draw the boundaries for these things. To whom does this benefit go to, and who are paying these costs, and so on. And so I wanted to know what's your take on these, and how do we change the perception with these things, because even though ecological economics, as it has now evolved, is more important, I mean, it should probably at some point try and replace environmental economics as such, but that still has not happened. And they still teach the conventional environmental economics in universities. How do we get through this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the challenge that you point out there is that definition of what is an externality. And often that's rooted in a bunch of things, but especially the geographic definition that you're working within. Because if you have a smokestack and you make the smokestack tall enough, it's giving off a lot of nasty carcinogens into the air, so that wind will take it to another location outside of your geographic area of what is considered an externality. You remove that externality from your equation, right? When in reality, you're just moving it downstream a bit to somebody else, and then killing people down the road a bit, right? So I think that from my perspective on that, as I'm not an economist in anything, qualify that, is that we need to think on a global scale when we're talking about externalities. When we talk about extracting resources like coal or oil and things, we need to think about not just what's the impact about where they were taken from, but what's the impact about once they're used. So when we extract petroleum products from the ground and we burn them, that's not just local ecosystems, that's a global impact. So then that should be taken into the economics equation as well. How that happens, I prefer to figure that out. Somebody else think. But we need to think on a larger level than just the short-sighted things that we as humans tend to think.
So it's about looking at the larger footprint that you have. And once I met Professor Eugene, and he told me something about the virtual water. So a person in Birmingham wearing a cotton trouser, a cotton shirt, should pay an amount for the water that he has used in Bangladesh, where cotton grows. So Birmingham UK doesn't grow cotton, but he is using Bangladesh's water to grow cotton. So your footprint is not limited to your geography. It's beyond that.
And particularly these days with all supply chains being global, your footprint is immediately global. Immediately.
So we should probably start factoring in everything before we.
So there is a technique in management science. It's called supply chain analysis. So at every point of the supply chain or the value chain, you can actually make an audit, ecological footprint audit, and that is how you can calculate a frying pan being made in China and being exported to California. You can actually trace and you can see the ecological footprint at every stage of the frying pan travels. The amount of fuel, the amount of materials, extraction, same for settlement.
There is an organization called as K4C, based in maybe Holland or UK. So they make this more analysis and they integrate almost everything. They do not leave anything outside the supply chain. And that's if we are able to pay that cost, we might not be able to buy a shirt.
The cost of your car, right?
So with that, we will. I think everybody has been a very long session. We can hear the rock and roll, coming out really loud.
That's not rock and roll.
I mean, that is not rock and roll. That's not rock and roll. Some equivalent of.
That's EDF.
I think we need to conclude with a tradition that we have fostered at the university with a simple presentation of our university tokens to our guests, whose presence we value very much.